so plan to be here after we come back from the floor so we can vote these bills out and get bills moving. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. The chair lays out Senate Bill 1515 by Senator King and recognizes Senator King to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. This is a bill I'm really excited about. As you know, religious liberty was the bedrock of America's founding, and up until the early 1970s, in the Supreme Court decision Lemon v. Kurtzman, America regularly acknowledged the role that fundamental religious documents and principles had in American heritage and law. One of the most recognized set of foundational principles were the Ten Commandments, which were displayed in public buildings across the United States, including schools, government buildings, and courthouses, and including the U.S. Supreme Court building. For the last several decades, however, expression of that heritage has been restricted. What became known as the Lemon Test was the culmination of a fight to eradicate all references to religion from the public sphere. Litigants like the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and the Satanic Temple used the Lemon Test to block as many displays of America's religious heritage as they could, including the Ten Commandments display and veterans memorials. One of their largest upheavals was in 1990 in Stone v. Graham, in which the Supreme Court used the Lemon Test to strike down Kentucky's law requiring 10 commandments to be displayed in public schools. Prior to Stone v. Graham, many public schools displayed the Ten Commandments. After Stone v. Graham, however, public schools across the country almost universally removed their Ten Commandments displays. Now, however, the legal landscape has changed. In Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, which was just last year, 2022, the Supreme Court overturned Lemon, eliminating the Lemon Test and instead looking to America's history and tradition for whether the government may recognize our religious heritage. Unfortunately, after 50 years of Lemon's rule, many of our traditional recognitions of our religious heritage are still removed and only now beginning to slowly return. Many government officials are not taking actions they can in that restoration because they're a little bit afraid of the ghost of Lemon, I think, and continue to eliminate any trace of religion from their purview after being told for years that such displays are illegal and impermissible. Senate Bill 1515 would simply require Texas public elementary and secondary schools to display the Ten Commandments in their classroom. The language that we've put into the bill is the same language for the Ten Commandments. As you know, there's different translations of the original Hebrew, but this is the same translation that is actually on the monument on our Texas State Capitol grounds over on the north side of the building on the west end. At present, Texas public schools have no such requirement, and this legislation only became legally feasible with the Supreme Court's overturning of the Lemon Test. I think this would be a good, healthy step for Texas to bring back this tradition of recognizing America's religious heritage. Senate Bill 1515 restores a little bit of those liberties that were lost, and most importantly, will remind students all across Texas of the importance of a fundamental foundation of America and Texas law, and that being the Ten Commandments. With this, Mr. Chairman, and forgive the long read testimony, but I wanted to make sure that I got the court cases and everything accurate. But we do have three very esteemed invited witnesses today that I think you'll really have a fun time listening to.
Good. Thank you, Senator King. Members, any questions? At this time, we'll open up public testimony on Senate Bill 1515. The chair will call Timothy Barton, Matt Krause, and David Barton. How are you doing, Representative? Good to see you, man.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have all three of you here today.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead. We'll lead off with you.
Thank you, Chairman and Vice Chair. Appreciate y'all having us here today. My name is Matt Krause. I'm here on behalf of First Liberty Institute, and we are in favor of Senate Bill 1515. As Senator King pointed out, the law has undergone a massive shift. It's not too much to say that the Kennedy case for religious liberty was much like the Dobbs case was for the pro-life movement. It was a fundamental shift. As Senator King pointed out, in 1980, we did have that case in Stone v. Graham where the court, it was a 5-4 decision. It was a per curiam decision, which for those who are not steeped in legalese means that nobody really put their name on that. So it was a very close decision. It wasn't a very broad decision, but they used what was called the Lemon test to strike down this statute in Kentucky that said you could have the 10 Commandments on the walls. And as Senator King pointed out, just last summer in the Kennedy versus Bremerton case, the court vehemently disposed of the Lemon test, which means it's no longer good law, which means those precedents based on that decision are no longer good law as well. And so we think it is ripe. The opportunity is there to ensure that kids are able to see the 10 Commandments in their classrooms no matter where you are in Texas. And so I think it's also worth pointing out that First Liberty Institute, their client was Kennedy. So for 7 years, we led Coach Kennedy through that process and ensured that his religious liberties were validated and were protected, but also pushed to have that Lemon test overruled. And so it didn't just start in last summer in 2022 and 2019 in the American Legion case when they were deciding whether or not to take down the Bladensburg Cross over in the east, that the first chinks in the armor of Lemon were first seen. And so that also was a First Liberty Institute client and case. And so I don't think there's any better expert on this subject matter in the state and frankly in the country than First Liberty Institute. We've looked at this and we think, again, the time is absolutely ripe to challenge Stone v. Graham because the foundations and the underpinnings for that opinion are no longer there. We think there can be a restoration of faith in America, and we think getting that 10 Commandments on these walls is a great way to do that. Not only do we think it's a good thing, but it's very constitutional and legal as well, thanks to the Kennedy decision overruling and disposing of the Lemon test, which then makes the ruling in Stone v. Graham pretty much moot. So we're very confident that it can withstand any kind of legal or judicial scrutiny that's brought its way. And we think, again, this is a great step, not only for the state of Texas, but could serve as an example to the rest of the country as a whole. And we appreciate Senator Phil King's leadership on this and him bringing this forward. And thank you, Chairman, for hearing this bill as well.
Appreciate that. Members, any questions? What First Liberty's been able to accomplish has just been remarkable.
It's pretty incredible.
And then what are we seeing in other states for, similar legislation?
Yeah, this is pretty much the first of its kind. This is as far as it's gotten in any of the other states. We are seeing a massive response to that disposing of the Lemon case, whether it's in Idaho. We've been working with legislatures there. We've been working with some in West Virginia and other places to restore that faith in America. But the 10 Commandments bill, this is the first that we know of, and we think can really set a trend for the rest of the country to have Texas's stamp of approval on it. Texas leads in a lot of ways, as you very well know, and we think this can be another area where we're doing that, but there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. Others have proposed these similar type bills, but nothing's made it as far as this, and we hope it continues on to the governor's desk.
That's right. Very good.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman.
You. Mr. Barton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members, as Matt mentioned, the Bladensburg case, they first said Lemon's not good, and then they vehemently overruled it this last year. But they also said in the Bladensburg case that the new standard will be if it's traditional, historical, it's going to have a presumption of constitutionality. And so what I want to do, we have about 160,000 items out of American history, but this is the first textbook ever printed in America. It was done in 1690 in Boston. It was used into the 20th century, so it's through 5 different centuries that it appears. And it's interesting that in this textbook, there are 43 questions on the 10 Commandments. So this is what we used in the 20th century, and just examples of that.
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to interrupt you and make sure everybody understands. Those are the original
These are
documents
originals
that you're holding up there, not copies.
And for the record, state your name and your position on the bill for us.
Yeah, excuse me. David Barton, Wall builders in favor of the Ten Commandments bill.
Thank you.
So questions they had were, what's the reason annexed to the Fifth Commandment? What is the Fifth Commandment? What's required in the Fifth Commandment? What's forbidden in the Fifth Commandment? And on it goes, 43 questions. And so this is where students started in school. They continued with things like readers, the famous McGuffey reader. A McGuffey reader had the Ten Commandments, part of what students studied also in school. This is Noah Webster's history book, History of the United States. And at the end is a long section on the Ten Commandments. So this was traditional educational stuff. So with that test that Bladensburg is given, that if it's traditional, historical, presumption is constitutionality, Ten Commandments, that really is a piece of cake. Jump ahead in the 20th century a little bit. In the 20th century, Judge Rugemer in Minnesota got with the Fraternal Order of Eagles and said, we need to have the Ten Commandments more than we do now. And so the Fraternal Order of Eagles in the 1940s put up 10,000 copies of the Ten Commandments in classrooms across the United States. That went back to a case that Judge Rugemer had where a young man, he didn't want to sentence him to juvenile detention. He said, listen, if you just live by the Ten Commandments, I won't sentence you. And he said, I don't know what the Ten Commandments are. He said, you don't know what the Ten Commandments are? He introduced him to the Ten Commandments, completely changed the young man's life. And so he helped Judge Rugemer get the Ten Commandments in schools. About 10 years after that movement was going is when Cecil B. DeMille came out with the movie Ten Commandments. And so blockbuster movie, Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner, Martha Scott, etc. And it's interesting, this is the program that was given. If you went to see the movie at a theater, when you walked in, this is a program that Cecil B. DeMille had everyone given. And it shows you the actors in the movie and who they are. But it also opens with a statement in here where he says that we've passed 32 million laws in America so far. And he said, and if you live by the Ten Commandments, you don't need the 32 million laws. So they continued to point to the Ten Commandments publicly as being the source of the moral code. When we did a study about 20 years ago, at that point in time, we identified over 500 cases, court cases across the nation, where the court has cited the Ten Commandments favorably. All Ten Commandments appear somewhere in statutory code or in court decisions, and so it's traditional in the courts as well. Phil had mentioned that the Kentucky case in 1980, Stone v. Graham, after 191 years of having the Ten Commandments in classrooms, the Stone v. Graham court said we're not doing that anymore. Now, as Matt mentioned, that's been dumped now that the limit test is gone. But this is actually what was hanging in the Kentucky classrooms. That is the Stone v. Graham. This was given me by a legislator from Kentucky who passed that initial bill. And so the bill that Phil has introduced reflects this. And as it describes the Ten Commandments, this is what was hanging in the Kentucky classrooms. And as Phil mentioned, this looks exactly like what we have on the Capitol grounds, which is also one other piece I'll show you. When they did the movie, Cecil B. DeMille took 9,000 extras. They went to Egypt, did the Exodus, and then when they got to Mount Sinai, he had part of his crew go up on Mount Sinai, find some granite, and bring it down, from which he carved the Ten Commandments that were used in the movie. This is actually from the movie. This is the Ten Commandments in the movie. And what's interesting is when Phil showed the picture of the Ten Commandments, in Texas, you'll see that these two blocks are above the Ten Commandments on the stone. And that tells you it was erected by Cecil B. DeMille. In this case, 1961, Charlton Heston came to Texas to dedicate the Texas Ten Commandments. But this is how you know that it was done by Cecil B. DeMille. They did 180 of these huge marble statues across the nation. There's one in Oklahoma, one in Arkansas, etc. All the capitals had one. So this is traditional historical stuff, and that meets the test that the court has now given us for what can be done. So it's hard to say that anything's more traditional in American education than was the Ten Commandments, going back to the very first textbook and going up through the 20th century. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's great, right on time. Appreciate that. And tell us again the year for the first textbook that you have on the
1690, and Benjamin Harris in Boston printed that first textbook, and it was reprinted, still reprinted in the 20th century.
And then that would still reprinted in the 20th century.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you had mentioned that
I
before.
think I have. Yeah, here's the 20th century copy. This is reprinted. This is a reprint of the 1777 copy with John Hancock on the inside. So they had famous Americans at that point. But this is the 20th century reprint.
Gosh, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Go ahead.
I'm Tim Barton from Wall Builders, speaking in favor of the Ten Commandment Bill. And Chairman and all members, thank you for being here and allowing us to be here today. We've heard at this point the legal aspect and the historical aspect, which is obviously the significant barrier that has to be crossed in order for this to happen. I want to add one more component, and that's the moral aspect. If we go back to the original textbook, the New England Primer, printed first in 1690, then printed and used in public schools all the way through the early 1900s, one of the questions students were required to learn at the end of that textbook is, where is the moral law summarily comprehended? And this was the first question leading into the Ten Commandments, is where do we find moral law? The reason this becomes significant is all of us who have paid attention to what's happening in the world and culture today know that our young people are having a very hard time determining what's right and wrong. Where do we find moral law? Is that something subjective? Is it up to each individual to determine right and wrong for themselves? Because there's a level of irony to where we are today that we would tell people it's wrong to kill somebody, and yet we would say it's forbidden to present something that would tell students it is wrong to kill somebody. The very foundation of moral law for all of the Western world, for the morals of civilization, have been derived from the Ten Commandments. If we go back to the idea, one of the arguments we've heard in recent weeks is one of the leading causes of death among teenagers, among children, as the argument goes, is guns. Well, again, there's a level of irony if we're saying that we're seeing a rise in violent crime when it comes to inner cities, when it comes to gang violence, when we are seeing teenagers kill other teenagers, something that not only is illegal, not only can you go to jail for, there's a death penalty that can be ascribed for someone that kills in these situations. And yet, again, we are saying that we're not going to tell students a foundation of morals is we should not kill people. If we look at the Ten Commandments, the basis of the idea, why do we believe it's wrong to steal? Why do we believe, even here, it's wrong to lie under oath? The foundation of morality comes from the Ten Commandments. And as we are looking at a civilization, no society, no civilization can exist and can continue if there is not a moral foundation. The Founding Fathers very well understood when John Adams says that our Constitution was made only for a moral and a religious people, it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. He understood that freedom only works if there's a moral foundation, because if you give freedom to immoral people, all they do is immoral things. You have to have a level of morality for freedom to maintain, and there's no better standard that's ever been given for a basis of morality than the Ten Commandments. Not only are the Ten Commandments now legally allowed to be displayed for students, not only is there a historic precedent for them to be displayed to students, but there is a moral component that if we are expecting to remain a free society and for students to understand what is right and wrong and to refrain from killing and stealing or even lying under oath as the case might be, we need to return the Ten Commandments to students in front of them in their schools so there's a basis for that morality. And there might be some that would say, wait a second, but we know there's a separation of church and state or whatever the argument might be. And all that really would expose is that they really don't understand the history of even those very statements. If you go back and read Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist, where he was explaining the government cannot limit your religious expression because there's a separation that keeps the government away from religion. The idea was never to secularize the government, which is why the Founding Fathers themselves did prayer proclamations, whether they were governors, whether they were presidents, or even from the Continental Congress. They were not secular individuals. They just didn't want the government controlling religion, but this is not an argument to control religion. This is an argument to uphold a standard of morality that students need to be able to govern their lives and to live as members in a free society. Thank you for letting me share.
And Mr. Chairman?
Great. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Tim, I'm sure there'll be some people who, in their own good conscience, are going to come up and testify that they're concerned that this is a separation of church and state issue, which we know historically and legally that's not correct. But I keep thinking about, our kids are growing up in a culture where there are almost no absolutes, and everything is relative. What's right for me, relativism. What's right for people, they're brought up often to say what's right for me may be right for you, but it's not right for me. What's right for Dr. Campbell may be right for her, but it's not necessarily right for me. Everything's relative. There's no absolutes, no standards. And I just think how important it could be, and used to be, and was when I was growing up, for those kids to walk into a classroom and see on their wall every day things like, you shall not kill somebody, that you're not to steal, that you're not to lie and bear false witness against someone else, that you're not to covet someone else's property that is their property, and to see that reinforcement that comes from every day, from walking into your classroom and seeing just basic standards that, frankly, a lot of them don't hear in their homes. They certainly don't see on the internet, and they certainly don't get out of social media or television. And that impact, I think, is something that's been lost in America, and it began to be lost in the early 1960s. And I just think it's a very small step, but I think we don't realize, and would you agree, what a meaningful step it can be to every day. Same reason that in the House, Mr. Krause, we did the pledge every day because it says something, and we want it in our schools every day for people to do the pledge because it says something. We also want kids to see that there are certain standards for morality and want them to see that every day when they walk in that classroom, K through 12.
Senator King, you're absolutely right. There's a level of intellectual dishonesty when people presume that there are no absolutes. Because if we look at what happened in one of the most recent school shootings up in Nashville, everyone would agree that's absolutely wrong. Well, there's a standard of absolutes that says it is wrong to murder people, it is wrong to kill people. And every one of us agree that absolutes exist, even though some might arbitrarily say, well, it's up to each individual. Morality actually is something that is an absolute that we can agree on. It's always wrong to murder. And for that to be reinforced every day for students to see this, if we are sick of seeing some of this violent crime and some of these issues, then we should get back to students, as you mentioned, every single day being able to see the reality of there's a basis for truth. There's a basis for right and wrong. And for that to be reinforced, for them to have, and this is not even compelling them to believe in Jesus, as some might argue, right? It's too much religion. This is not telling them what they have to believe as far as when it comes to their faith, but understanding the basis for morality and even the basis for law here in America, here in Texas. That very basis for law is based on something that does need to be reinforced, because too many of them grow up in a place where they're not seeing that. I have a friend who taught at Houston ISD, and during their staff training one August, they were told that as teachers, they're not supposed to do any kind of moral lessons that might be an imposition on the students. I have a friend who was teaching there who's very smart. He said, wait a second, so we're not supposed to teach anything moral to the students? They said that's correct, and maybe that was very well intended because people have different ideas of right and wrong. He said, but what if there's a student who says, I'm hungry, I'm just going to go rob the convenience store, I'm going to go steal stuff. He asked, can I not tell them it's morally wrong to go rob a convenience store? And they said, well, that's correct. You shouldn't tell a student what you believe is morally right and wrong. Instead, you should ask the student, what do you think you should do? And whatever the student says, you should say, well, you need to do what you think is right. Unfortunately, we're living in a place we're seeing people doing what they think is right, but what they think is right often is things like what resulted in Nashville with that shooting, where people showed up and arbitrarily did something that we know is fundamentally morally wrong. Instead, we should be presenting those morals in front of students so they know there's a basis of morality, and killing is always wrong.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, any other questions? Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator King, for bringing this forward. Not so much a question, but a comment. It's kind of crazy, isn't it, that societies or societal dictates that you need to teach about sex ed and everything along that way, if you will. But then they try to stand against moral teaching, which Senator King and I know Chairman Creighton has talked about it, y'all have talked about it, how laying a good foundational base strengthens the nation, and it's just kind of crazy that on one hand they say, oh, you can't teach that, and the other hand, oh, you must teach this. So with that, it's just a comment. And then David Barton, I enjoyed reading your books, most certainly one that is my favorite, and this off topic a bit, but it's American history in black and white. And if y'all haven't read that, I'm putting in a plug for it. It's a fast read. You can get it done in an hour or two, and it's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate that. Appreciate each of you. Members, any other questions?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
For the time and for your input and expertise.
Thank you very much.
Very much. Appreciate you. At this time, with a quorum, members, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Senator Creighton,
Here.
Senator Campbell,
Here.
Senator Betancourt, Senator Birdwell, Senator Flores, Senator King,
Here.
Senator LaMantia, Senator Menendez, Senator Middleton, Senator Parker, Senator Paxton, Senator Springer,
Here.
Senator West.
Okay, members, we have a quorum, and we'll resume public testimony on Senate Bill 1515. This time, the chair will call Tara Beulah, Julia Russell, Alan Parker, and Sean Hall Laquona.
Yeah.
Aye. Chair will ask the clerk to recognize Senator West as being present. Go ahead.
How many bills have we done? This is the first one.
Unfortunately, our current public education system.
I'm sorry, so sorry to interrupt you. If you could state your name and your position on the bill.
Yes, sir. My apologies.
For, against, or on, and who you represent.
Okay, my name is Tara Beulah, and I am for the bill. Unfortunately, our current public education system is a disaster. The teachers don't want to be there. The parents don't want to send their children there. The kids do not want to be there. It's a breeding ground for chaos and confusion when it should be a picture of order, insight, and knowledge. How do we fix this? We start by inviting God back into our schools. God is His Word. The Bible says, "My son, attend to my words. Incline thine ear unto my sayings. Let them not depart from thine eyes." Thine eyes. Our kids have to see them in these halls. Keep them in the midst of thy heart. We must allow the 10 Commandments to be posted in every classroom in the state. We also must allow chaplains to come in and aid our student population. We have to get back to the basics. There's no such thing as separation of church and state in the Constitution. We are a Christian nation, and we should start acting like one. And the last scripture I want to leave you with is Psalm 78. It says, "We will not hide these truths from our children." And as a mom of 2, I do not hide these truths from my children. And I do not want any child in the state of Texas to be, have these truths hidden from them. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about His power and His mighty wonders. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Julia Russell. I am here to testify in favor of Senate Bill 1515. As other witnesses have highlighted, we are in a unique position to restore the tradition of teaching and displaying the 10 Commandments. As any student of law understands, our laws are built upon the foundation of the 10 Commandments. Without the 10 Commandments, there is no standard for behavior to guard and guide students to know right and wrong. At that point, all rules of society are susceptible to erosion and ultimately eradication. The 10 Commandments are not only a sacred text in the Jewish and Christian faiths, but they're also essential to direct secular issues, or more secular issues, of just honoring one's parents, not murdering, not committing adultery, not stealing, not bearing false witness, or not being covetous. As a mom of 7, I homeschool because I see what's happening in the public schools, but it is my desire to see order and morality restored to the classrooms. It will again be a place where people can feel safe sending their children. We must restore a biblical standard to our educational system. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Sean A. Hall Laquona. I also represent Liberty, Justice, Truth. I'm for SB 1515. Can you all hear me? All right.
Yes.
Chairman Creighton, Senator King, and the Education Committee of the 88th Texas Legislature, I hope you are having a very good day. I bring an order from the advocate. Listen, Israelites, to the rules and commands that I am teaching to you today. Learn them. And standing for SB 1515, knowing the Lord our God made a covenant with us at Sinai. He did not make this agreement with our ancestors. He made it with all of us who are alive here today. The 10 Commandments. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make to thyself any graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his cattle, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Jesus replied, I assure you, most solemnly I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Motion granted, cause dismissed, case number removed, amen. I am, pursuant to Article 3, Section 3, Paragraph 2, 21st word of the Federal Constitution, brought perfect peace to those both far and near, and I have healed him, said Jehovah. In every way and everywhere, we accept this with all gratitude. My order is legitimate, and SCOTUS realized this in 2019. And I say hallelujah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Appreciate you both. Thanks for your testimony. This time, the chair calls Alan Parker, Brad Dacus, and John Litzler. Go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman Creighton, Senators. Thank you for your time. My name is John Litzler. I'm the General Counsel and Director of Public Policy for the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, and I'm testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 1515. We're a convention of more than 5,300 Baptist churches across the state of Texas. While we believe in and seek and to follow the Ten Commandments, we're all opposed to this bill ultimately because of serious concerns about freedom of conscience and religious liberty. In 1611, there was a man named Thomas Helwys who wrote 27 articles of belief over in England, and he formulated what became the earliest Baptist confession of faith. One of those core beliefs was an individual's freedom of religious conscience. His advocacy for religious freedom was not popular. He was imprisoned by the king and died shortly thereafter. But his beliefs did not die with them. Just 4 years later, they made their way across the ocean on a boat called the Mayflower, where they would later become enshrined in a new nation's Bill of Rights, and where the Baptist denomination would grow to become the largest Protestant denomination in the new country. Why the unsolicited history lesson? Because we have concerns about the use of taxpayer dollars to purchase a religious text, even a religious text we agree with, and we have concerns about the freedom of religious conscience for Texas school children. My daughter will start kindergarten in the fall. She'll learn to read. If this bill passes, one of the first things she'll read is this heavily edited version of the Ten Commandments. Just a couple weeks ago, this committee debated for hours about the concepts of parental rights and parental freedom and parental choice. I should have the right to introduce my daughter to the concepts of adultery and coveting one's spouse. It shouldn't be one of the first things she learns to read in her kindergarten classroom. I should have the right to teach my daughter the tenets of my faith in a way that's age appropriate and appropriate with her development. I think it's appropriate that the version of the Ten Commandments in this bill are from the monument outside, which appear to be a heavily edited version of a King James translation. Because the king who imprisoned Thomas Helwys was in fact King James himself. And at 1611, when Helwys was writing his separation of church and state articles, King James was producing his own version of the Bible and persecuting anyone who dissented. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Members, any questions? Senator West.
What else were you about to say?
That was it. Just that King James in 1611, at the same time as writing, the King James version of the Bible, he persecuted dissenters, including the early believers of the Baptist faith, imprisoned Helwys himself. Helwys died in prison for founding the Baptist faith.
I'm interested as it relates to the issue of religious freedom. I'm Baptist, okay? And obviously, I've studied the Ten Commandments. Well, I won't say I've studied them. I've tried to follow them. The issue of religious freedom, expound on that.
Well, as I was saying, we believe that we have the rights to educate our children in their. This is a very heavily edited version of the Ten Commandments. It removes the context, for starters. It starts with, I am the Lord your God, and then the next sentence about it, who led you out of Egypt and from bondage, or some translations say slavery, is removed. When it comes to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy, the next words are context about the seventh day, working 6 days and resting on the seventh day. Most Christians don't do that anymore. We actually rest on Sunday, which is the first day, and we have a new covenant, a new commandment. If we were going to look for a historical or moral document that would cure society's ills, has been mentioned today, I would recommend we look to the words of Jesus or Paul, who summed up the law in honor the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, not the Ten Commandments.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just,
Senator King.
you mentioned your concern with public dollars, and I guess you're familiar with the Carson case, and that's really not an issue anymore. But you understand also the bill allows for private funds to be donated for use in this, much like we did with the In God We Trust statute that passed a couple of years ago, which I think, did y'all oppose that too?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I do recognize that, Senator, and I would say it goes a step further in talking about how if it's not donated privately, or the way I read the bill, if it were to be defaced or destroyed, the school would have an obligation to replace it, which could use private funds if private funds were available, but is obligated to use public funds if not. I hear you saying that use of public funds is not an issue. I think you mean legally maybe it passes constitutional muster. I would argue it still creates a religious freedom conscience issue with us.
Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know where to start. You really represent, this is truly the values of the Baptist Association. Who do you represent again?
We're the Baptist General Convention of Texas. I do not purport to speak on behalf of all Baptists.
Okay, okay, go ahead.
In
Finish.
part because of the freedom of religious conscience. We believe every Baptist, not just every Baptist church, but every Baptist member
Okay.
of that church has the freedom of conscience to believe how they see fit.
Okay. I'm Baptist. I would never have thought that an association that sounds like it represents Baptists, and I recognize that associations don't always represent everything the members do, but I am very surprised and disheartened and disappointed that this association says that Baptists take offense to having the Ten Commandments in the classroom. I'm so shocked by that obviously you can see that I am irritated. And I don't mean to take offense with you, but I really just don't understand that. Do you believe, does the association, I'm sorry, what are they called?
We call ourselves Texas Baptist, but we're
Okay.
the Baptist General
Well,
Convention of Texas, an
okay.
association of churches.
Do they believe in saying an allegiance to the flag for America?
Yes.
They do.
I mean, we don't require it. We don't.
Well, of course you don't
in
require
our
it, but do you
churches or our
believe in
schools
that?
or whatever, we're not opposed to the saying of the pledge. at
Okay,
school.
so you do believe in one nation under God,
Yes.
and you feel that children, do you feel like they should know that?
Yes.
You feel like they should pledge for their patriotism to the flag of the
The
United
pledge,
States?
the Declaration of Independence,
But
similar
is that
historical
infring-
documents are not religious texts.
Is
This
that
is
infringing-
elevating
Okay,
a
I
religious
hear what you're
text
saying.
over other religious texts.
I hear what you're saying. How can you appreciate a freedom? How can you ask a child to appreciate, I guess, the moral conscience if they don't have a chance to know where to choose their freedom, because they don't have a moral code, if you will, that is written somewhere. I mean, if they believe in Muhammad or any of the other religions, they have a moral code and they can choose, but it's like you have to know, you have to have read and have knowledge of something to develop a moral code and to have freedom to choose, don't you?
I don't disagree with you, Senator. We believe this responsibility of the church and of those faiths to educate children on their religious freedom, not the duty of the state.
Okay. And I guess I really don't know what. I'm probably speechless, and many of you here are probably wondering, how in the world is she speechless?
And
But I think that's just it.
Madam Vice Chair, the record shows on registration that the organization is called the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So
You had stated a different organization that you represented when she asked you the question. I was just clarifying.
Yeah, thank you. I apologize. The Baptist General Convention of Texas is our legally incorporated name. Texas Baptist and the Christian Life Commission is our DBA. We have a DBA in the state of Texas.
That sounds different, but
Okay.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, it just clarifying for the record. Members, any other questions?
Chairman?
Yes, Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Chair. So, you talked about parental rights. Of course, totally agree with that. Parents, are placed there by God to raise their children. But you testified against the bill that would do that. SB 8, I recall you being in this committee saying you opposed money following the child, and you opposed giving children that don't have the chance now a chance at a Christian-based education, right?
Well, I don't want to relitigate our stance on
you said
SB 8,
it, though. You were against it.
But yes, but not because of Article 1, which was the Parental Bill of Rights. I think in my testimony I made it very clear we appreciated Senator Creighton's Article 1 and the Parental Bill of Rights. Our concern was with the ESA and Article 2, which is a different matter separated from parental rights.
Well,
There was nuance to that
do you support
testimony.
the Blaine Amendment? You know
We
what
have
that is.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do you support it?
No, we have concerns with it. I think that there's a lot of that's rooted in anti-Catholic sentiment, and no, we have concerns with the Blaine Amendment.
And if you have concerns, of course, you agree with the Espinoza case, right?
We do agree with the Espinoza case in the sense that if money is given to private schools, you cannot discriminate against religious private schools simply for being private.
Well, so
Or
in
for
other
being
words,
religious, excuse me.
there's no legal basis or constitutional basis to oppose something like this or money follow the child to a religious-based institution because of your opposition to the Blaine Amendment and you're saying your support, I guess, of the Espinoza case. I'm confused why you're against this and also why you're against educational choice, money following the child to any school, the parent's choice, but it could be a religious-based or Christian-based school.
Yeah, again, it's kind of a nuanced position. I wouldn't agree with the characterization that we have no legal basis for being concerned about separation of church and state. I think that's too far. I would argue that the state shouldn't be giving money to any private school. However, we do agree with the Supreme Court decision that if the state were to give money to private schools, it could not discriminate against religious schools, purely for being religious. So there's the free exercise aspect and there's the establishment aspect. And if you're going to give money to a religious school, or to private schools, you can't discriminate against schools simply for being religious.
You mentioned separation of church and state, so you're relying on a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists as your entire basis for opposing this?
I know. Again, I don't think that's entirely fair. There was a characterization earlier that anyone that would disagree with this based on concerns about religious liberty must not know their history. I take exception to that. I think Baptists know our history really incredibly well. I think the entire basis for that conversation between Jefferson and the Danbury Baptists and the back and forth in those letters, again, goes back to the writings of Helwys in England, even before that. I think the history goes even before the founding of our nation.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions?
I just want to make one more comment.
Yes, Vice Chair Campbell.
Without getting too irritated, I would prefer that as a Baptist, that when you speak, just give the whole actual name of the association that Chair Creighton had said that you what is it that you are?
We're the Baptist General Convention of Texas, and we do
Well-
business as the Texas Baptist Christian
Well, I
Life Commission.
recommend that you just use the title of what you're doing business as, because this does not represent me. I'm obviously not a member of that. But when you talk, you make it sound like, and I think that is disingenuous at the least. You make it sound like all Baptists, or I feel like you're making it sound like all Baptists, and I think that is wrong. So I would prefer, I don't know how others, but I would prefer, because I think you're misrepresenting Baptists in general. I recognize that we all believe on a continuum, but I think you misrepresent. And because when somebody says Texas Baptist, I guarantee you they're not thinking you can't put the 10 Commandments in schools. And when you talk about maybe we should have something more of what Jesus said out of the New Testament, I agree with that too. But Jesus was there when God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses, because he was there when God created the world. Jesus has been there all along, and he's here today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I may just apologize, it was
No.
not.
Okay, thank you.
It was not an intentional misrepresentation. We are one Baptist convention. There are others in the state of Texas, and I apologize if it didn't seem that way.
And I know I was
Well spoken.
aggressive. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your apology.
Chair would ask the clerk to show Senator Paxton, Senator Betancourt present, Members, any other questions? Go ahead. Thank you.
Committee members, my name is Brad Dacus. I'm a constitutional law attorney, graduate of the University of Texas School of Law. I'm also the president and founder of the Pacific Justice Institute. We are incorporated here in the state of Texas, Dallas, Texas. We have 29 offices in 23 states. I've been practicing this area of law, defending religious freedom, parental rights, sanctity of life for more than 30 years. I have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to make it really, really brief. We have defended In God We Trust on our currency, and we did so successfully before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The reason we were successful is because we were able to make it very clear to the court that the phrase "In God We Trust" is a statement of our history and our heritage. To deny our history and our heritage is a deprivation to our society. Well, when we're talking about public schools, denial of our history and our heritage is just as much of a deprivation. The Ten Commandments and the posting of the Ten Commandments is but an acknowledgement of that history and heritage, not just generally, but of American law itself. And you can trace the origins of American law from bankruptcy law to criminal law to tort law to family law back to the Ten Commandments and the history of it. We don't just talk, we actually work with states all the time. We work with organizations in North Carolina to actually put up the Ten Commandments in public schools all across the state. And they did so in the context of history and heritage. It's an easy thing to defend, and I make it very clear. I think that is the intent of anyone that I know who's supporting this. And I think it's good to go on the record that is the purpose of this, not to in any way proselytize in any way, shape, or form. Thank you.
Members, questions? Mr. Dacus, great to have you here. It's you've got quite a pedigree. We appreciate you taking the time to be here in front of Senate Education and to provide some expertise. How did we get so far away from what we're discussing today in our public schools? You saw Mr. Barton brought forward one of the first textbooks from the 1600s, published through the 20th century. But in your opinion, how did we get so far away from this conversation that we're having today on just interesting opinions on a return?
Right.
Where it's really where we always were to begin with.
Yeah, you said that very well, and of course I want to recognize David Barton and his organization, along with Matt and First Liberty. I think they did a great job in their presentation. I think that what we're dealing with is an implicit, indoctrination and of false presuppositions of our Constitution. One of them is the separation of church and state. Even before the last three appointments to the Supreme Court, the majority didn't sign off on that, but agreed instead with benign neutrality and accommodation. But this has been a misnomer that has been growing, particularly since the 1940s, and has manifested itself more and more in a society that is wanting to not appreciate or separate ourselves from the reality of history. I've told people who have different beliefs and foundations that they're free to have those beliefs and foundations, but that gives no predicate for denying our youth reality and truth as to our history and our heritage. Our youth today, they need to understand our truth. They need to understand our nation and where we came from. To do so leaves them handicapped in understanding where we should go and how we should get there.
And how do you feel about just opinions related to displaying the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms, violating religious conscience, or stripping a parent's right to explain the Ten Commandments to their own child?
Yeah. Parents still have their rights to explain the Ten Commandments. They can explain it as they wish. Just because, like, for example, if the school district decided to post, symbols of the Aztecs, and their history of what they did, that would in no way be implied by a parent that the school was in some way endorsing the religion of the Aztecs and sacrificing babies, except maybe in the state of California, but that's another point. But in no way should a parent be presumed to assume that this is a religious indoctrination. Once again, to deprive our children of our understanding of our laws, our heritage, is a tremendous disservice and a slap in the face to quality education for a generation dealing with challenges and changes moving forward. Understanding our history, understanding our origins of our laws, understanding the concept of where fundamental rights come from is a huge disservice. And I think having the Ten Commandments is an educational tool for a valid secular purpose, even though I'd like to note the Lemon Test is dead, and this Supreme Court I'm very confident would uphold this as being constitutional.
That's great. Members, any questions, Mr. Dacus? Thank you. Appreciate your time and your testimony and your just willingness to be here today for us.
Well, we're here to serve the state of Texas in the days to come, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
We'll see more of you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we had one more witness register. The chair will call Chad Green, McKinney ISD trustee. We'll give Mr. Green an opportunity to come in if he's in the corridor. Okay, it seems that Mr. Green is not with us, so is there anyone else wishing to testify on, for, or against Senate Bill 1515? Okay, with no other public testimony on Senate Bill 1515 will close. And Senate Bill 1515 will be left pending, subject to the call of the chair, and we appreciate Senator King bringing it forward.